Hey, we're back. I've almost finished the smoothie that I was given a minute and a half ago, and we're going to talk about another really cool new piece of New Relic. In this case, we're talking about integration with Snowflake. We have Daniel here on the stream. Daniel,
Hey, what's up?
people.
Hi,
Thank you so
Daniel.
much for coming out. I'm going to put Daniel's links down in here if you want to go follow. There's some pretty neat stuff out, in there. But right now, we're talking about Snowflake. So let's start with probably the thing that's on the top of most people's mind is do what now? What is Snowflake?
It's a really good question because like loads of tech products, like they give itself a random name like Snowflake, and that doesn't explain at all like what it does. Same as New Relic, I guess.
It's not even. It's not even six-sided, which is so unfair.
It really could be anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, Snowflake is basically a data cloud company. So what they do is they provide this massively scalable data warehousing thing, which runs in any of the big clouds, so like AWS, Azure, and Google. And I guess they've just been really, really successful over the last couple of years. I think they were like last year's hottest IPO, and a lot of people are starting to use it and adopt it. But what actually is it? Well, you can run this, you can basically send all of your data to Snowflake. And what they've done, which is really clever, is they've separated out, like a database system is basically storage where you store the data, but then you need some compute to actually query it and interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
And what they've managed to do is split the storage from the compute. So basically that you have your storage in one place in the cloud, and then you can like dynamically spin up compute. Obviously the cloud is great because you can just get compute really quickly and then you can retire it when you don't need it. So they have this idea of something called a virtual warehouse. So when you need to run a query gets assigned to a warehouse. If the compute isn't there, it gets spun up, it runs it, and then it goes away. So the more you query, the more you spend. The less you query, the less you spend. Pretty clever.
This is an interesting thing. There was I think it was Ian Coldwater was talking about how this is like a prevalent thing now that people are thinking about how they do whatever kind of warehousing or data pipelining, but the fact is that a lot of them are charging just based on storage, which means that some customers are getting a real deal, right? Because they send a ton of queries, or they do things like they have live dashboards up all over their office where they're sending, really complex queries every 15 seconds to just update, a cool graphic display, and costing, their servicer quite a bit more than somebody who stores more data, but just, only queries it in kind of business critical stuff.
Yeah, I just want to confirm my understanding, though, that I have in a typical setup, I might have like a database over here that's my SQL database, and then I have some NoSQL database running over here, and they're not connected, but I'm building these kind of custom integrations. So instead, Snowflake has presented the opportunity for me to throw my data up there into the cloud, and it sits in this giant blob of data. But then in addition to that, there's a separation of the part where I query it, because you need a compute bit to get the data out. And that is a pay-as-you-go that scales on demand. So I no longer have this problem of like a server just sitting there running idle, containing a big old database, but mostly not being.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I guess it's mostly structured database. So people use NoSQL for like documents and stuff like that. This is more typical structured data.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
things you can query using SQL.
Oh, nice.
And this is like, it's not so much talking about like Snowflake superpowers, of which there are a few, but like mainly it's like what they're doing with how they're charging you for stuff.
For sure.
And it's very, very, if you're dumping in a lot of data and sending only like very targeted, very optimized queries into it, like it's a ton cheaper than other ways to warehouse your data.
Yeah, for sure. And they've got some other stuff, like PCI compliance and all that boring stuff that big companies care about.
I'm going to squint so it looks like I know what PCI compliance is.
I
know I had to answer some questions on it once.
Oh yeah, we've all been there. The dreaded security questionnaire.
This is the part where you store customers' credit cards, and my best approach has been to take Polaroids, where I'll just take Polaroids and put them on my desk of my customers' credit cards.
I like those carbon paper floppies. What was the problem with that? Why can't we go back to that?
Just put them all under the counter there at the Macy's.
So
I have a blog actually, if anyone's interested to learn a little bit more about Snowflake and like the kinds of things you can do with it. I think I've got it up here on the screen.
And we promise we're not going to read the blog post on screen, so we'll keep the text size where it is. So
you just cut out my whole part of the episode. I was here in the script. It says read the blog post word for word.
Word for word. So I understand we actually use Snowflake at New Relic, correct?
Yeah, apparently so. So I think like all of the customer data and like usage data and stuff like that all gets stored in Snowflake, which means I guess we can do a bunch of analytics and reporting on it, which maybe helps us to understand things like improving conversion and all that kind of stuff, understanding when customers are likely to convert and stuff. So yeah, we use it internally as well, apparently.
Cool. So I guess I'm still kind of curious. Oh, we do have a request in chat to zoom in on the text. So if you'll hit zoom and we'll get a little bit larger, that would be
rad. Zoom in, but no reading, because then you'll stop listening to our important words.
We're here to watch TV, not read. Okay, we're not here to learn. We're here to have fun. It's TV time. I'll point you to the top level domain of Twitch. It's not a learning platform. Please do not learn anything. If you start to learn something, please leave. Yep. So I'm a little curious. This is, I've been working with New Relic for a long time, and I'm always curious when someone says, "Oh, I want to monitor something that is like someone else's service," right? It's like someone else's code, their service, and I'm like, because I always think of New Relic kind of the old school way, right? Which is that it gives you that real deep view into the code that you wrote. That you say, "Oh, you didn't format this method correctly or something." And the first time someone asked me about this, which I got my start back in New Relic support in like 2015, because I'm a million years old. When the first time someone asked me this, I was like, are you going to email the people who actually sold you this software, right? Or like this SaaS tool to say like, hey, it's not working as well as it does. Like, hey, you should go optimize this other function that you didn't write and don't have control over. And so, yeah, so what does it kind of mean to be monitoring like someone else's SaaS tool?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, right? So there's like, you can obviously monitor the apps that you're writing and you have access to the code and you can monitor exactly how you want. And New Relic does a really great job at that. But, if you think about where we are today, I almost said 2020, but it's actually 2021. I keep forgetting. People are using way more and more like services, right? SaaS stuff, services in AWS, and the more that you ship out the responsibility of that stuff to other people, I guess the less control of it you have. So the first thing about monitoring someone else's software is you're really kind of at their mercy in terms of what you can get from them. Like you can't just stick an APM agent on the Snowflake.
Yeah. You can't just say, hey, show me exactly what's going on inside your code, right?
So yeah, you're kind of more at the mercy of what the provider thinks is good to show you. Right. But Snowflake are actually great at giving you tons of data about how the service is being used. So they're one of the best companies I've had a chance to create an integration for, because they expose so much useful data. Others, not so much, but Snowflake's great. And the thing is, it's really important to monitor not just your code and your logic that you're creating, but all the services that interact with that as well. Snowflake's a piece of data infrastructure, right? So it's probably not in the path of customers using your site, but if you're relying on it every day to do reporting, and make business decisions, then you need to make sure that it's working.
Yeah, and it's true that people can sometimes, they can tune out when you say, oh, we're going to monitor costs, we're going to monitor expensive queries. But first of all, this can always be, any part of your stack, right, can be your first indicator that you have a problem, right? So this may not be applicable here, but for example, right, maybe you're just paying for a database SaaS product, and maybe the first indication that you have like a SQL injection problem is that database time, right? Mm-hmm. So, or size of records that are coming back or whatever else, right? So if you can get data about how any service is being used, it's useful way beyond just kind of the bean counter side of just saying, oh, well, exactly what does this cost us,
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like if you think like New Relic or the company that I was working with who I created this, like everyone relies on it every day for the report. So if you can't get that, no one does any work. So I mean,
Yeah.
I imagine from Snowflake's perspective, it eases their support burden, certainly. Like in a world without this, my indication is, hey, Snowflake's not responding. It's broke.
for sure.
And
Or
we've
like
got 40 engineers
Snowflake's,
opening tickets, right?
yeah, Snowflake's slow, and then you can actually with this realize, hey, it's not Snowflake, it's the god awful query that I wrote, which
Yeah.
tries to
It's
scan
like,
half the world.
who gave Jonan the API keys again? Somebody pull Jonan's keys, right?
Yeah. Problem was really caused again by a CTO who thinks that they can still code. All right, so let's take a look at some data. Shall we see what we get back from Snowflake?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll just mention is to actually use this, there's a GitHub repo where we publish the integration. So if you actually want to connect your Snowflake account to New Relic, there's 8 simple steps that you can follow.
Links in the chat if anybody wants to follow on there too. Could we zoom in just a little bit to get even closer to
Enhance?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you can run it on all the different platforms, Mac, Linux, or Windows. And yeah, it takes a couple of minutes to set up, I guess. And once you've done that, then data will start flowing from Snowflake into New Relic. So what I've done is we're monitoring all of the kind of performance data that Snowflake offers. But hey, you might be like, I actually want to just get some information about how many orders we have, like some random custom data. So you can do that as well by writing your own query, and then that data will flow up to New Relic. But once you've done that, basically I'm here now in New Relic in the Data Explorer, and it will create for you 2 data sets, one about your account and one about your virtual warehouses. So you can actually see all of the different metrics that are available and query those directly. But that's quite low level. So what we've also done is created some nice dashboards where you can actually see it. So I've just highlighted a couple of different areas that you might be interested in. So the first one's costs. Everyone who does stuff in the cloud where it scales.
I'm a broken record with this, but let's zoom in and enhance a little bit if we can. I know this is a complex dashboard, so it doesn't always respond super great to zooming, but yeah, hey, that looks great. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so just things like keeping an eye on costs, right? If you are paying by how much work you give it, if you accidentally give it a lot of work, it's like if you start up a side project on one VM and then it gets to the top of Hacker News, then you're going to be spending a lot of money in AWS. Same thing, right? You want to make sure you're keeping an eye on these costs. And then obviously you can alert on it if they go above a certain level. So you can make sure that you don't really annoy your finance directors.
Yeah, and the other thing I really like about monitoring costs, which, if we want to be in that DevOps world where we understand like operations, even if we write code all day, right? First of all, you have to think something about costs. The other thing I really like about it is cost covers a lot about how the code is actually running. So I had an example where we were working with some serverless functions, and they were coming back and they were returning, a data return, but they were going and hitting the database successfully, but they were coming back always with empty results. And the way that revealed itself was that the cost started to drop to like nothing. And so, if you looked at sort of any other kind of high level metric, you didn't really have much indication that something was off. But when you're getting thousands of requests a day and the cost went from, $200 or $300 a day to 0 or like 70 cents, it's like, oh, something is deeply wrong here. And obviously you're not going to set up an alert based on like, wake me up anytime things get suddenly cheaper. But it is, like costs can cover a lot. And obviously, right, high cost, there's a ton of queries are running long, they're multiplying like crazy or whatever else is going on, right? Hey, if you see costs shooting through the roof, it might be something that worries the accountants, but it might also worry you too about the performance of your code.
Yeah, totally. It's like a good proxy for other stuff going wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a nice combination metric, which I always like. So do we want to take a look at kind of what the setup process looks like to get this stuff integrated?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, the instructions are right here on the repo, and basically you'll need like a virtual machine or a server to run this integration somewhere. The first step is you need the infrastructure agent, the New Relic infrastructure agent, because that's actually what is going to run this integration for you and go and speak to Snowflake. So I assume you've done that. Then you'd obviously clone this repository onto the machine and download the release. But I'll start from there. So let me know if you can see my terminal. Can you see it?
Yep. Advanced, bigger. We want bigger letters.
Bigger.
Must have bigger this. I'm going to step away from the monitor for a minute because my child appears to be fighting with my dog, and I will return shortly. It's a good time because Jonah hasn't gotten to say anything for a minute, so I'll let you take over for just a moment. Be back.
I wanted to talk about the Git repo cheat piece because I apologize if this is obvious to people, but it was not obvious to me that I install the agent, and the agent is going to enable me. The infrastructure agent is going to enable me to use the Snowflake integration. The Snowflake integration is another repo that I download that has a binary in it that achieves this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so there's a set of binaries in there for each of my platforms. I pick the one that I'm using.
Yeah, I can load it up here. For example, you'll come here to release and you can see we've got one for Linux, one for Mac, and one for Windows. And download the relevant one onto your server.
Okay.
And then basically once you've done that, you'll be on your machine here, and I've got the repo already cloned onto the server, and you can see I've got the binary here, Snowflake, and I'm doing this on Linux. And then really the most important thing to do is there's this file here called snowflake.env. So that's like an environment file. That's where you tell our integration, what's your account name, which user is going to connect. I can show you what it looks like.
Is it just, don't show me your secret password?
I have taken it out.
Look at that. Very clever. Okay. Replace me password. So this is all of the information that I would need to connect to Snowflake along with my New Relic Snowflake home. What is a New Relic Snowflake home?
That literally just points to the directory where the binary is here. So.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Working directory is exactly the same.
And I'm a SnowSQL role of an account admin. Is it necessary that I be an admin to use the integration? Could I have a lower?
Actually, yeah, I probably should mention that.
Let's zoom this text just a little bit because I know you're seeing it, Jonan, but I think that Stream can't make fun of your terminal setup unless you have. There we go.
Yeah,
feeling good about that. That feels better.
Yeah, so the role is all about like what level of access the user who connects to Snowflake will have. I've got account admin there. I highly recommend not using that role, actually. You can create a custom user which has the same level of access to, there's something in Snowflake called account usage, which it needs access to. So strongly suggest using that role instead. Glad you asked.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've done that. And then basically, on Linux, there's one thing I should make you aware of is that if you're running systemd, which is like an initialization system for Linux, you need to do another step, which is edit this file, systemd, system, and then there's a definition of the New Relic infrastructure service. Basically, you need to add this line here, environment file, and you need to link it to that environment file that you made earlier.
So this is that's one of the settings that you've already pre-configured in this case.
I've done it already, yeah. Okay. It's like, I don't know if you have, there's a children's program in the UK called Blue Peter, and they'll always have one that they made earlier, right? So we're kind of cheating a little bit here, but yeah, you would need to do that in the setup.
Okay, well, you already figured out the path because you have to put it in there as your home in the other file, and then you put the path into this one, and the two are linked enough to find each other, and we're off to the races.
There's one more step.
Okay, what do we got?
You need to copy in the repository. There is a directory called flex configs. So in flex configs, you will see there's one for Linux, Mac, or Windows. You would copy. In this case, I'm using Linux, and you copy it into the New Relic infrastructure folder underneath a directory called integrations.d. That's the last step. You do that, and data starts flowing.
So how long do I have to wait before I see it in my dashboard? A minute? A couple minutes?
Yeah, so by default, this integration is trying to be quite conservative because, again, you pay for the queries in Snowflake. So I decided to query once per hour. You can change that if you want. So it will do a query as soon as you start this, and then once every hour. So you'll basically get 24 data points per day.
And is there a upper bound there then? How, like, the most often? I'm assuming if I'm doing it multiple times a second, I'm probably going to get blocked.
The lowest is 15 seconds. And that's
okay. So I get up to 4 times a minute. I can check this integration to get all the data out of Snowflake and show up in my new Relic dashboards.
Yeah. The one thing though, so all of that data that Snowflake makes available, it typically has about an hour delay.
Oh, okay.
So that's something to be aware of as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is more like a pricing trend than like, oh my God, something's on fire, right? Which hopefully, right, you're not setting things on fire with your data warehouse queries, but
yeah, totally.
A person whose username is, I believe, Speedy Farf says, Speedy. I'm gonna call them Speedy. Speedy has 2 questions. One, the M file is more secure, but wouldn't it be easier to demo with some YAML config instead? I can answer that one. Yes, probably, but if you want to answer that one.
I'm sort of continuously improving on this integration. So it's something I sort of created a couple of weeks ago. So I've still got like a whole roadmap of improvements that I want to make. Raise an issue on the repo enhancement request, please.
Yeah.
It's all open source, so I love people making contributions and stuff like that.
And so, for your second question is a good one. Like, would you really run an EC2 instance just to go and grab these data points? And we just have to be running this infrastructure agent somewhere. Like, the EC2 is a usable enough demo platform, but you could be running it on a separate server. You could be running on something that's already doing some work. It's just going to be one additional process on there, right? It doesn't need its own like spec'd out server.
Yeah, totally.
Though I mean, micro instance, not terribly expensive.
Yeah, I think it's in the free tier, this one. But actually, again, another thing that I do want to work on is just packaging this up as a container so that you could just schedule it onto Kubernetes or something like that. And it would obviously just sit amongst however many other hundreds of containers that you'd have running on a node.
Yeah, we should talk about getting it as a Lambda, right? To just run as a scheduled Lambda serverless.
Yeah,
cool. So in that case, then we would have even fewer steps than we already have to set this whole thing up. But then we'd be able to identify pricing terms.
I'm kind of annoyed there's 8 steps, actually. I want to make it simpler to do.
I feel like this is common, though, to any software project I take on. And then I often will spend the 90% of my time getting down the one step. Like, what do they say? Like 90% of the work is takes 10% of the time, the last 10%.
Yeah.
Vice versa. Yeah.
Pareto rule.
Yeah. I would like to request live here that you add a yarn like CLI with emojis. This integration needs more emojis in it.
Yeah, I love it.
Otherwise, this is brilliant. Good work on that. I like that.
Yeah, it's really neat, and it's really neat to see data this rich coming in as like a single person project. That's pretty cool. So I want to talk about the underlying data a little bit. I know that there's some warehousing with Snowflake. Yeah, there's some separation of, you're not just sort of looking at all your data in a single massive blob. Is what we see on New Relic, is all we get is kind of the account-wide data, who presumably billing is going to be account-wide, or can we break it down by warehouse at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I could show you here, for example, if we look at costs are obviously account-wide, but this is where we're looking more at the performance of individual warehouses. So you can actually see here, for example, like, unfortunately, I don't have really rich demo data to show you because I'm running off my free Snowflake account. But if you wanted to look here, you can see, for example, if I zoom in.
This is such good synergy because we're talking about V6 load testing after this. So you can simulate, thousands of requests and cost yourself real thousands of dollars, to give us a slightly better demo with richer dashboards.
in this example, yeah, we're just looking at like what are the top queries which are actually scanning data in storage, broken down by the warehouse itself. So yeah, I guess it's important to look at like, you know, you don't want to just get an alert saying, hey, your Snowflake is slow. Like you'd really like to know which warehouse they're talking about so that you can actually go and optimize it. Another good example of things, unfortunately, it's all zero, but bytes built to remote storage or local storage, these are really good ones to watch out for and alert on, because basically you can say, hey, I want a virtual warehouse. But sometimes the queries that you send it are bigger than the warehouse sized. So it will start to spill data out of memory onto disk, and that means it's going to be really slow. So these are ones to watch because it indicates basically that your warehouses aren't sized correctly for the workload.
Yeah, I love that. Just the very name of a stat called bytes spilled to disk is fantastic. Yeah, but you know, it's really neat as a leading indicator that your queries are going to suddenly slow down.
Yeah, another one, compilation versus execution time. If you see any of these really jump up, I mean, compilation would be that Snowflake does a bunch of really clever stuff about optimizing your queries for you, but if you see that go up, it means that you're just sending it like really, really complex queries that are taking a long time to compile. On the other side, I guess execution time would show that the warehouse is really busy and the time that it's actually taking to query those is slow. And again, increase the size of the warehouse.
I mean, that one's not relatable to me because every time I've made slight innocuous changes to a query, they've always performed better and not suddenly a lot worse for no reason. Jonah, I don't know if that's ever happened to you.
It has happened to me kind of a lot. And so I want to make sure I'm understanding this graph here. We have the average time here that is compiling our query. So I submit a very long and complex query, and it compiles it up into something it can run internally, which is presumably not SQL because I gave it SQL. And then it executes that thing. The actual execution time should always be slower, or not maybe always, but often be slower or about what my compilation time is. What have you seen?
Generally, I think that execution time could be longer, actually.
Longer, okay. So then, but at some point, if I see a large spike in execution time, or rather a trend over time going upward, then I know that it's time for me to right size my warehouse.
Yeah.
Which fortunately for me, Snowflake is in the business of providing. And I could say, I would like a bigger Snow warehouse, please.
Yeah, there's like a tick box setting in Snowflake that you can do to say like, allow the warehouse to automatically grow. Like you can say I only want 3 instances, for example, but then you can kind of turn that off and let it get bigger and bigger.
In American, that's a checkbox. Tick box is a checkbox. So, that's okay. I'm translating. This is live translation for the audience. I just like actually.
Yeah, in America, a tick box is an actual box that's full of ticks. So you want to be
pleasant user experience
about it.
Yeah. I actually really like the term ticking off all the boxes, though, because that's still a thing that we say strangely. So watch for your green part to get huge. That indicates that you need to have a larger warehouse to do the work. Your bytes spilling, that means that the query is returning too much data. So you're running a query that is just select star from Snowflake. I imagine that would bring down the house, and that would put all the data and spill it over to disk. And then you wouldn't be able to get, would it return just part of it? Do you know? I haven't ever really used it.
The big thing would be that the performance would slow down, right?
Okay.
I mean, just like eventually, basically, it's a bit like paging, like on a server, right? When you run out of memory, it starts sticking memory, it starts sticking data onto the disk, and then when it starts paging, it's just super slow. So it'll get there eventually, but probably not in the time that you want to wait for it.
Yeah. Okay.
This is very neat, Daniel. So we got some links in chat if people want to take a look at the repositories. If you're watching this as a clip on YouTube, they'll be down in the YouTube description. No surprise. Stop trying to click the video. We don't do that. That's not cool. So they'll be down in the description below or in somewhere in the surrounding text here. I promise you'll get the both the GitHub link and a link to read up on Snowflake if you're curious about it. Did you have other stuff you wanted to plug or say thank you to? People you want to say thank you to while you're on the stream?
One thing, I guess, just to say, I decided to start working on something very similar, I guess, the same data, but as a Prometheus exporter, just because I'm quite a fan of Prometheus, and it's quite cool to, do something that's, whilst this is open source, this integration, it requires you to be a customer of New Relic, I guess, if you want to use the infrastructure agent stuff. So I want to make the same data available, but for anyone who wants to do it. And by the way, you can put Prometheus metrics in New Relic. So 2 birds, 1 stone. But yeah, hopefully I'll finish that in the next couple of days and I'll be writing another blog about it.
Well, I like that. As we're growing, we're doing more and more of these integrations with this open source observability tools of various kinds. And so anything that lets someone, start dumping stuff into Prometheus is always kind of interesting to me because, again, New Relic can work as that like Prometheus front end as well to give you insight into what you have stored in Prometheus.
For sure.
And the Prometheus integration that you are writing then would connect directly to Snowflake, but you could still hypothetically then store that data back into New Relic. We could build the most convoluted pipeline here if we went even further with this through the CNCF tooling. I quite like Prometheus as well, though. Except PromQL. PromQL is cursed. I can't figure that thing out to save my life.
Yeah, I tried to take a look on a weekend project. I was like, oh boy, that's a lot. Well, we don't need to dog
on PromQL. I love it. A lot of people love it. I would love to learn more about it. I attribute all of this to my inability.
Yeah, when something is difficult for me, it just means that I'm having a bad day. I don't think it means anything.
I don't think it's wrong with the tool necessarily.
I've never gotten good at React, and I've been told many times that it's very easy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on. We're going to bring on our last guest in just a minute here, Gary Spencer, to talk about load testing with Case 6. First, we're going to put up a thing that says we'll be right back, and we will be right back as promised.
Thanks you, Daniel,
again for coming out. Put the social links down in the chat.